Absolutely delighted now to be joined by Mike Clement from the New Zealand Police. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Now, one of the sessions that I know you're taking part of is the impact of narcotics around the world. Give us a little bit of a flavour, if you will, of what that impact is.
Well, if we look across all of the dimensions of the narcotics issue, from supply, production, the demand in communities, and ultimately the harm, I think law enforcement finds its way into all of those dimensions. And I particularly today wanted to talk a little bit about how law enforcement views the harm when it lands in communities.
Give us a little bit of an idea then on what harm narcotics do to communities.
Well, from the addict themselves, so the person that's addicted to the particular drug, to their families, there's a very significant impact, to neighbourhoods and communities at large. So I think right across the spectrum, that's where it lands in terms of the vulnerability out there, but also importantly for law enforcement and other sectorial partners, it's a very significant issue.
I mean, obviously narcotics and organised crime is a big business. So how hard is it for law enforcement to keep up, if you like?
Well, law enforcement, as you would expect, and I think something that we're very proud of, works within legal frameworks and has to spend the dollar that's available for that purpose wisely. So people hold governments to account around that. I don't think transnational organised crime works within that same constraint. They're probably not bound down by legal frameworks. They've demonstrated fleet of foot when it comes to being able to adapt to meet the market. And so they challenge themselves to be ahead of law enforcement, quite frankly, and we've got to be better.
Now, you talked about it being a transnational effort. So how important is it that law enforcement from around the world works together on this?
Oh, it's incredibly important, and even more so in a globalised world, if you know what I mean. I think the internet brings opportunity to both law enforcement but also to criminals that want to exploit vulnerability when it comes to narcotics or any other commodity for that matter. So absolutely, those that don't combine, coordinate and leverage what's available, then we will surely fail, I think, in terms of defeating the foe.
What are some of the drugs out there that are causing the problems? What's the biggest villains at the moment?
Well, here in the US, and it's not something we're experiencing firsthand in New Zealand yet in any great degree, is fentanyl, and there'll be a lot of discussion during the course of the next few days about how that impacts on communities, but also for law enforcement and other workers who are associated with drug trade. It's a particularly lethal combination. It steps the game up even further from where it's been with traditional drugs, as if methamphetamine and heroin and cocaine aren't bad enough. Along comes another evil that's really hurting people and is quite fatal on occasions.
Yeah, we talked about the importance of a transnational effort. Are there some kind of new ways of thinking about the problem?
Well, I think more and more law enforcement and communities and governments are thinking and challenging perhaps the conventional wisdom that's been out there. So, bigger law enforcement responses in the traditional sense maybe aren't all of the solution. And so I think in New Zealand I'm particularly proud of the fact that we have an opportunity at least to think about why the demand is so high, because it seems to me that transnational organised crime in general, want to exploit that demand. And so it feels to me like we need a bit of a pincer movement going on here, is that if we attack it from both ends, if we start to think about how the demand is shaped up and how we could impact on that, then I think it might bring about some new thinking. And is it a health issue or is it a law enforcement issue? Those types of dilemmas. Now, that won't be a popular debate for some traditionalists, and including my own background, but it seems to me we have to be a bit different in our thinking.
Finally, what about New Zealand itself? What are some of the effects in communities in New Zealand?
Well, methamphetamine is the drug that's causing the greatest problem. That's not to say it's the only one, but methamphetamine is surging in terms of its popularity, the demand I talked about. I think the opportunity that I was talking about just a moment ago is to see if we can't join up with other sectorial partners, particularly health, and communities, and start to identify how you drive the problem from the inside out as opposed to attacking it from the outside in. And so the government has a strategy around social investment, which I think is the right one. So it's starting to say, how do we stop this intergenerational spend, endless spend on those very vulnerable people, and change the outcome from the one that we're all too familiar with. So some good stuff happening in New Zealand. In the panel discussion on Tuesday, from a New Zealand perspective, what I'd like to bring is a discussion about how community law enforcement and other sectorial partners can gather themselves up in a way that we perhaps haven't been able to previously, and push from the inside out, so as opposed from the outside in. So I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Well, we're all looking forward to it, and thanks ever so much indeed for joining us today, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Okay.